As a real estate professional helping people relocate to the Oregon coast, one of the most common questions that I get is the Oregon coast a safe place to live, specifically as it pertains to crime? We're going to talk about all of that in this video, so stay tuned to learn more. Hey, what's up everybody? This is Clem with the Oregon relocation team coming to you from the Oregon coast. And in this video, we're going to look at crime on the Oregon coast. So this is in no way an attempt to steer people to or from particular parts of the Oregon coast. We're talking about regionally, how does the Oregon coast stack up when it comes to crime, both violent crime and property crime. So again, we can't necessarily say this town is X amount safer than this town, because that's going to potentially lead somebody to avoid specific areas, which has an adverse effect both on the reputation of that place, economically on that place, people deciding to go there, to move there, to spend time there, whatever it may be. And look, we have a lot of people who watch these videos at this point. We help a ton of people relocate to the Oregon coast, and so what we say and our words in describing these things really do hold a lot of weight, right? So again, not trying to influence people one way or another so much as we're just trying to give some perspective on what crime really looks like on the Oregon coast as a whole. Now, if this is your first time to the channel or you've been here and you haven't already and you want to get more videos like this, make sure to hit the subscribe button and tap the little bell to get notified every time we drop a new video. One of the biggest things to consider from my perspective when looking at the Oregon coast and evaluating the crime is some of the macro level things like population, the size of these towns, the economy, so the job opportunities, median household income, individual income. There are a lot of these things that I think once you dig into that and look at some of the history of the Oregon coast as well, you can get a little bit better of an understanding maybe about what you're getting into. What are some of the crimes or the majority of the crimes that take place and why? So when you are looking at the Oregon coast and evaluating crime, it's important to look into these things a little bit deeper and get a little bit more of a big picture perspective on things, because you know, not all crime is created equal, even if it's within the same category, the same type of crime necessarily. So the more you scale that out, obviously, it's like you just have to look at the numbers like, okay, what's the rate for violent crime? What's the rate for property crime? Am I going to expect to see a lot of it? Is it going to be dangerous? Am I going to be unsafe? But again, when you narrow in a little bit, you know, looking at some of these macro influences, I think really the biggest thing is, again, you have to look at the economy. And the Oregon coast was dominated by timber and fishing. So when you look at these industries that were really kind of thriving in this place at one point that have now been really heavily regulated over the past 30 years, a lot of the economy on the Oregon coast really took a nosedive. So, you know, this is a relatively common story across the country, you know, especially in small town America, where you had some industry, whether it be, you know, coal mining or the auto industry, you know, things that were maybe, you know, a lot of jobs were like shipped overseas, factories were shutting down. I think either way, where you had, you know, one kind of big industry in a relatively small community where the majority of the economy was supported by this one thing. Again, on the Oregon coast, in particular timber, that industry has been hit by a lot of regulation, environmental protections, which you can argue the merits of. You know, I'm not taking a side one way or another. I think this is just plainly, I think you can look back over the decades and see that, you know, this has been the trajectory. And so the point being is that when you have some level of economic prosperity, and then that gets wiped out, now you have, you know, poverty, and then with that comes things like homelessness, you know, drug use, and then, you know, stemming from that, I mean, I think progresses or regresses, however you want to look at it, to a certain level of crime. Theft in particular, if you look at it, you know, it's like kind of crimes of desperation, things like that, where, look, I'm sure it's not completely logical where there's all these people who are down and out and saying, I have no other option, so I have to go break into somebody's car and steal something. But you can kind of see the trajectory where, again, where there's some level of economic depression, and then these adverse effects become a byproduct of that. So just a little bit of a breakdown, again, from my perspective on how to view a lot of the crime on the Oregon coast, especially when you look at the numbers where the majority of the crime you're seeing is property crime as opposed to violent crime. So like I mentioned, this is one of the biggest questions we get asked, and it's hard to get too specific, again, because we don't want to seem like we're steering somebody one way or another, even if it makes sense in the context of that conversation. Hey, is it safe here in this neighborhood or here in this town? Logically, it doesn't make a ton of sense why I can't give you a straight answer, but ultimately it could be considered to be a fair housing violation. So again, one of the biggest questions we get asked is the Oregon coast a safe place to live? Is this town or that town a safe place to live? I'm going to do my best to answer that question in this video. And if you are wondering that yourself, and if you are indeed thinking about moving to the Oregon coast, and if you want to talk more about some of these different neighborhoods, regions, if you want to talk about what it's like buying a home on the Oregon coast, the process, if you want to talk about your timeline, your budget, ultimately what the possibilities are, give us a call, send us a text, shoot us an email, or click the link down below in the description of the video. We can talk all about it. Okay, I want to throw some numbers at you just to give you a little bit more perspective about crime and safety on the Oregon coast. There's a pretty big range here. So, there's a lot of data publicly available to look into, more specifically to dig into particular areas. And you can look at, community forums on like Nextdoor and Reddit. There's a lot of information out there to, start to give you a little bit of a clearer picture on specific areas. But what I did was took all of the Oregon coast towns. There wasn't information available for some of the smaller villages or unincorporated communities like Oceanside or Netarts or Nesquin or Charleston, or there's a lot of these little villages with maybe a few hundred people, but what we looked at was primarily kind of the population centers of the Oregon coast. And again, either way, even within that, there was a really big range, so we'll talk more about that. But took all of those towns and put together a median, just kind of looking at averages for the Oregon coast as a whole. Now, I was a little bit surprised at how much of a range there is, because in general, when you look at towns on the Oregon coast, there's more consistency than not. The style of town, the size of town, aesthetically, you have the ocean, culturally, I think there's, again, a ton of similarities up and down the Oregon coast, with, some differences, and, you can kind of dig into the nuance a little bit more regionally, which is something we can talk about further if you want to reach out to us and we can have that conversation. But either way, we'll look at the US, Oregon, and then the Oregon coast as a region, and then also break that out to violent crime and property crime. So obviously, two very different categories. Nobody wants to get their car broken into, or God forbid, their house broken into, or be a victim of some other kind of property crime, vandalism, things like that. But obviously, violent crime is the big thing where it's like, do I have to worry about walking down the street, in this particular town at night or whatever, and fear for my safety? And a very typical way to break this down or evaluate it is the rate on a per 1,000 resident basis. So when you look at violent crime, nationally, the rate is 4 in every 1,000 residents. 4 in every 1,000 residents would be a victim of violent crime. In Oregon, it's 3.4 of every 1,000 residents. So slight improvement in Oregon compared to the rest of the country. When you look at violent crime on the Oregon coast, again, as a whole, as a region, it's 3 out of every 1,000 residents. So about 25% less on the Oregon coast compared to the rest of the country. And just a little bit less than the rest of Oregon. So the Oregon coast, in general, is a little bit safer in terms of violent crime than the rest of Oregon. Now, property crime is where you see a little bit more of the red flags. So nationally, it's 20 incidences of property crime per 1,000 residents. In Oregon, it's 29 incidences of property crime per 1,000 residents. So that is about a 50% increase from the national rate in Oregon. Now, on the Oregon coast, it's 28 incidences per 1,000 residents of property crime, so right in line with the rest of the state. Now, for sure, there's going to be places around the country, maybe close to where you live, where the property crime rate is at that level or higher, potentially much higher, or could be potentially, much less. You're looking at the national average, again, being 20 incidences per 1,000 residents. Now, when you look at most towns on the Oregon coast, I don't think in general crime has run rampant and it's completely out of control and your car is going to get broken into all the time, and anything else that could happen, really in that property crime category. But you probably wouldn't have to talk to too many people in a particular town before, learning about somebody who has had something happen to them directly or somebody who knows somebody who's happened to them. So, it's not like it's non-existent by any stretch of the imagination. Now, the other end of this conversation, and probably the more important part of this conversation that at least today in this video, we're not going to dig into too much, but you also have to look at the range here, because when we look in terms of, averages, when you look at the median rate, again, the Oregon coast is a little bit better on violent crime than Oregon and the rest of the country, but definitely worse than the rest of the country and right on par with the rest of Oregon when it comes to property crime. But when you look at the range of violent crime up and down the Oregon coast is anywhere from practically 0.3 incidences of violent crime per 1,000 residents, all the way up to 6 incidences of violent crime per 1,000 residents. So, basically 0, non-existent, to 6, which is about 50% more than the national average. So there are places on the Oregon coast where violent crime is a little more prevalent, than in Oregon and the rest of the country. Similarly, if you look at property crime, the range is 8 incidences of property crime per 1,000 residents to 60 incidences of property crime per 1,000 residents. So 8, again, that's not quite non-existent, but that is a really, really low number, compared to 20 nationally, 28 for the coast, 29 for the state of Oregon, all the way up to 60 incidences of property crime per 1,000 residents, which is 3 times the national average. But yeah, again, it's not like it's non-existent. I think, again, there is a lot of publicly available data and information. I think if we're having a conversation about it, and if it's like, if you're saying, hey, I read that this happened, blink twice if it's true, we're not going to completely disregard your questions. But again, we have to be a little bit careful and tread lightly when it comes to disclosing this type of information and, how it can sway people's decision to, look at one place over another or vice versa. So if you are thinking about moving to the Oregon coast, and if you want to talk more about safety, crime, things like that, but of course, if you want to talk more about just your home search and what this is going to be like and your timeline and ultimately how we can help you accomplish your goals, give us a call, send us a text, shoot us an email, click the link down below in the description of the video, schedule a Zoom call with us. We can talk about it. And if this video is helpful, make sure to hit the like button. That helps us out a lot. If you want to get more videos like this, make sure to subscribe to the channel, tap the little bell to get notified every time we drop a new video. And as always, we really appreciate you watching. Until next time, we'll talk to you later.